was younger, every year for Christmas I would drive upstate to my aunt's house along a stretch of highway. I cannot for the life of me remember the name of this road. All I know is it runs nearby Akron, New York at some point. However, most of the drive is through rural areas with little to no towns nearby. So it was the dead of the night. My groggy self had gotten off a long shift and had to drag my ass to my aunt's house since my extended family was expecting me the following morning. Near halfway through the drive, I realized I was low on gas, which irritated me. My brother told me that he had filled it up the day before, so he either forgot or was straight lying to me. I saw an archaic-looking sign for a gas station off the next road. It wasn't an official road sign, literally a pole with a slab of metal attached with gas off next exit or something along those lines painted on. That seemed a little sketchy, but people do the same thing with fruit stands on highways, so whatever. I pulled off the next exit on some dilapidated country-ass road through dense woods. The whole thing was creepy and surreal. I kept expecting Leatherface to come running out of the trees with a chainsaw. Anyways, eventually I came to the gas station and realized quickly that it hadn't been open for years. It was all rusted and the convenience store's roof was caving in. The gas pumps had all been taken out as well. I pulled over next to it and checked my gauge. I would probably only make it another half mile before running out, so I called AAA and they said they'd send a truck over. Now I played the waiting game. I left my engine on because when the headlights were off, everything was pitch black, and my paranoid self wasn't sitting next to an abandoned gas station in the middle of a forest in complete darkness. So most of the wait went uneventful until I sensed movement around the side of the old store where my lights are pointed. I look up but didn't see anything more, so I look back down at my phone. Then over the sounds of the night, I hear someone yell, "Hey buddy, come here," in a demanding tone. I look up and I shit you not, there's a dude standing by the old store looking towards me, illuminated by my headlights. He looked like a run-of-the-mill homeless guy. I was honestly spooked and figured he must have been squatting there. Still watching him, I rolled down my window and yelled something like, "Yeah, what's up?" Still mentally crapping myself. I had my foot ready to floor it out of there at the first sign of trouble. "You got any change?" "No, I don't, sorry man." I look up at him, he has this kind of vacant expression and is standing stiff. And I see more movement. There are heads. About 20 or so heads peeking around the trees beyond the man I'm talking to. I can't see them clearly at all, but they are definitely people. Literally just heads staring in my direction from around the trees. I see another guy beginning to walk from around the gas station, and then I turned around and sped off. I got as far away from that place as my tank could carry me and updated AAA on my location. The driver came back over and filled me up, and I didn't say anything. But after he left, I wanted to call the cops, so I called the nearest town sheriff department. They said they'd send a trooper over, and I gave them the location. When I got to my aunt's house, they called me back and said whoever was there was gone, but they could tell a large number of people had been living there for a while. Blankets, canned food, the usual. The whole situation still freaks me out, but frankly I can consider myself lucky I'll always have such a creepy story to tell. I'm just glad nothing bad happened. This happened over 20 years ago. I was driving back home with my girlfriend at the time. It was Christmas Eve and my mother's family used to hold a large celebration at my aunt's house in Estacade. This was my girlfriend's first time eating with my extended family, which she got on quite well with them. We spent the majority of the afternoon and evening talking, playing poker, opening presents, and drinking an assortment of adult beverages. My girlfriend had been quite inebriated by the time we had to leave, therefore I'd be driving us home. It was around 11 p.m. or so. I was driving my girlfriend's car along Highway 211. Now this stretch of road is surrounded by farms and dense patches of forest, and parts of it are unlit. But nothing to fear. I grew up in this area, so I knew this road like the back of my hand. The both of us were just driving and talking away, just two young lovers making the most of our moment together. There is a portion of the highway that descends down an enormous hill before crossing Deep Creek. Surrounding both sides of the road are thick forests. There are no lights. The only thing that we could see was the area directly in front of our headlights. I drive down the hill, across the bridge, and uphill through more forest. It's as the highway starts to flatten out that it happens. Something sprints across the road so suddenly that I almost hit whatever it was. I slam on the brakes. I turn to my girlfriend and ask her if she saw it. She confirmed that she had, but she couldn't make out what it was. Maybe it was a coyote, as they are a fairly common sight in this area. But something felt off about it. Whatever it was that ran in front of the car disappeared into the woods next to the road. Coyotes don't usually just start out in front of cars, not like that anyway. So for some reason, I decided to check it out. I turn the car around and switch on the high beams to better light up the forest in which this thing had vanished in. I step out of the car and walk towards the woods. I don't see anything, but now it feels like perhaps I've made a grave error. My heart is pounding and the hairs on the back of my neck are standing at full attention, but I still don't see anything unusual in the trees. Suddenly the car's horn blasts. It's not a beep 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 that you'd get if, say, your driver or passenger wanted you to hurry up and get in the car. No, this was a long blaring beep. I walk back into the car and ask my girlfriend why she leaned on the horn like that. She said nothing. Instead, she pointed to a spot about 50 feet from where I was standing. I looked over in that direction, and that's when I saw it. Surely this was the thing that ran in front of our car. It was a man. He was completely naked. His skin was covered in dirt and mud. In one of his hands, he was holding a hatchet. He looked back at us, and then he smiled and waved to us just before turning around and walking back into the forest. Needless to say, we got the hell out of there. Once we were safely driving again, my girlfriend explained what had just happened. While I was trying to look for the man in the area he had initially vanished in, he circled back around and came out from another spot in the forest beyond my car headlights. My girlfriend had seen something out of the corner of her eye, and that's when she saw him. Before she honked the horn, he was walking towards me, his hatchet raised as if making to strike me. We called the authorities once we got safely back home, but they never found anybody, or they just didn't tell us. But the officer we spoke to explained his theory. The man was obviously looking to ambush unsuspecting lone travelers for Lord only knows what reason. We all agreed that my girlfriend's quick thinking saved my life, as it let my potential killer know that I wasn't alone out there. I moved back into the area recently, so I now drive that highway often. No naked hatchet man sightings yet. I can tell you that I'm definitely extra vigilant now, especially near Deep Creek. Growing up, I spent every summer vacation at my grandparents' house in rural Tennessee. When I say rural, I mean their town was literally a cluster of homes with a singular one-lane road as the only way in and out. 45 minutes from the nearest freeway on-ramp, 30 minutes to a grocery store, and an hour and a half to a Sam's Club / Costco. What I'm trying to say is that this is about as remote as it gets. I'd play outside for hours and hours and maybe only see 2 or 3 cars. It's a lot more built up now, but it was nice while it lasted. It was around 11:30 p.m. and me and my dad couldn't sleep because it was an especially hot and muggy night. We decided to go for a drive through the hilly, curvy back roads that I absolutely loved and still do. There was a scenic access site that was just a clearing overlooking a cliff about 15 minutes further into the woods from my grandparents' house. It wasn't very well known. It was down a narrow 2-track lined with a couple of dilapidated trailers lining it every quarter mile roughly. Due to the isolation and lack of any real police presence, the area was lousy with meth during the time, and there was a local rumor of some inbred cult up in the woods. Keep in mind, it was midnight by the time we got to the parking lot for the overlook, which was just a gravel pit. My dad has always had a bit of an intuition and asked me if I really wanted to get out of the car. That made me hesitant myself, but I saw the amount of lightning bugs that were out, and catching them was my favorite pastime. Armed with a flashlight and an old Tupperware container with some holes drilled in it, we set off down the path to the cliff. We immediately heard noises in the woods, heavy footsteps, way too heavy for a deer, and there wasn't really a bear presence in this area. The woods were unusually quiet besides that. We both thought we saw someone hide behind a tree out of the corner of our eyes, and I didn't realize he saw it too until we brought it up in the car and vice versa. Here's where it gets freaky. Once we made it down the path to the cliff, we saw the outline of a man. He was about my dad's height, 5 foot 10 inches, but he was as thin as a rail. He couldn't have weighed more than 120 pounds. Here's the thing, he wasn't admiring the beautiful moonlit scenery over the cliff. He was standing perpendicular to it, just staring off into the trees, perfectly still. My dad slightly nudged me in the direction of our car. As I started walking back, he shined the flashlight on the man. As soon as the light shone on the man, my dad gasped and dropped the flashlight before literally picking me up and sprinting full force to our car. And as we peeled out, I had no idea what the fuck was going on. His face looked like a goddamn melted candle. My dad said after a few minutes of silence after we pulled out into the main road. Apparently the man had no nose, just 2 nostril holes in his face. The way he was described sounded like he was a burn victim. As we brought it up to my grandmother the next day at breakfast, she immediately turned pale. Apparently there was a meth lab explosion up in the hills a few months prior, and they were unable to rebuild the building. So they resorted to making their product in the woods and are very defensive, even homicidal, about their stash.
So this story happened almost exactly 3 years ago. I had just turned 15, and in Finland, where I live currently. Turning 15 is a big thing for teens, since when you turn 15, you can get a 50cc moped license, and these kind of bikes are a huge part of youth culture here. So, long story short, I had just gotten my license, and was in a party at my friend's house. The friend of mine came from a wealthy family, and their family owned a huge plot of land, mostly full of inhabited forests and lakes. His house was pretty much in the middle of their land, and it was a very remote place surrounded by a forest. Although I lived pretty far away, I insisted on going by myself with my brand new moped, since I was so excited of finally having one. My parents were obviously against this, but ultimately allowed me to drive there. The party lasted the entire day, and when it was about 2 a.m., I had to finally leave. Although their family is wealthy, the only road that connects my friend's house to the main big road is a long, badly kept and narrow paved road, surrounded by a forest. It is unsettling as shit, especially at nighttime. It should have been illuminated properly, but at the time, pretty much every single street lamp was either broken or tipped over by storms. I had asked them several times why they didn't take care of the road, but they simply replied that they weren't really interested in paying huge amounts of money for some company to come over and repave the entire road and replace every single streetlight. Since it was already completely dark, the only thing illuminating the road was a small single front light in my moped. After about 10 minutes on the road, I was about 5 or so minutes away from the main road, so it was still pitch black. Nothing was out of the ordinary, until I saw movement in the corner of my eye. I saw a figure running from the pitch black forest and falling down on its face in the middle of the road in front of me with branches and leaves flying around it. I slammed the brakes and luckily avoiding hitting the figure. The back brake locked up, so I ended up falling over and sliding along the road for a bit. When I finally stopped, I quickly stood up, and then I looked to where the figure was lying. Of course I thought that it was an animal like a moose or a deer, but I quickly realized that it wasn't an animal. It was an adult human. Pretty sure a man. At this point, he stood up, and we were about 3 meters from each other, just staring at each other. I've never been more scared in my life. Even more disturbing was that this man seemed to be more scared of me than I was of him. This man was about 20-30 years old, quite short and very thin. His face was pale and his eyes were deep in his sockets. If you know what a badly malnourished person faces look like, you know what his face would look like then. He was wearing a dirty turquoise hoodie and basketball shorts. Despite it being less than 5 degrees Celsius outside, he had unkempt blonde hair full of debris and leaves and had no shoes on, only soaking wet socks. At this point, he was constantly shaking, jolting and glaring to the direction he came out of with a worried expression on his face, like he was being chased or he knew that something bad was in the forest. I wanted to say something to him, but I was unable to say anything. After a short while, he looked straight to me and opened his mouth. It was like he was about to say something, but he quickly backpedaled, closed his mouth, and suddenly bolted to the forest. without a flashlight or any other source of light, and quickly disappeared. I stood there for a while alone before running back to my moped, lifting it up and driving away fast as I could to the main road. My moped had quite a few dents, a broken front mask, and a damaged exhaust, but it was still drivable. I drove home and woke up my parents to explain everything, while I was still shivering from shock. They obviously were furious that I had crashed my moped, and didn't believe what happened. They thought I was just being a jackass and doing stunts until I fell over. I didn't get grounded, but they didn't let me drive at night anymore. It was alright with me though, since I didn't want to do that either. For the entirety of the following week, I asked anyone who was at the party or was living nearby if they had seen anything unusual. I also followed the news to find out if there was something bad that happened nearby that night, or if there was an escaped convict, or a mental hospital patient loose. Nothing showed up, and nobody else saw anything. I still sometimes think who that guy was and what he was doing in the forest without a light in the middle of the night. I actually feel quite bad for the guy, and feel bad that I didn't help him then because it seemed like he was not okay. Was he just drunk or high, in the middle of a bad trip or some sort of psychosis? Maybe he was abused, was a part of some cult, or maybe something or someone was really chasing him through the forest. I just wish I knew. I used to live in a part of Memphis, Tennessee that was a little shaky. It was right on edge of what some would call the ghetto. But also there was a nearby area that was also pretty secluded and desolate as I lived on the outskirts of the city. Anyway, I was an 8-year-old boy when this happened, and my sister was only 5 years old. The two of us went for walks on occasion. This time, we went to the back of the housing division and further than we'd gone before. This area was pretty dirty and desolate for such a city, just train tracks and a nearby industrial facility. There was lots of dry tan grass coming through spots in the railroad gravel, lots of dusty crap people dumped illegally around the tracks. Also, there used to be a pack of stray dogs that walked around my neighborhood. But other than that, no people or cars would ever really be seen out there, not that far behind my neighborhood anyway. We were just walking along the tracks, talking, throwing rocks, when I saw some strange movement just beyond the tree line of this small wooded area about 40 feet ahead, and on the left a bit. I told my sister to look as we walked a bit closer. We had made it to about 10 or 15 feet away from the wooded area when we realized the movement was in fact a mime of all things, in the middle of nowhere, seemingly, hidden amongst the trees and thick dead vines that adorned the edge of the wooded area. Painted face, black striped shirt with black pants. He had the exaggerated expressions of a mime too. His eyes got really wide and he seemed to start performing for us for a moment. He was kind of doing it in a way too, I guess, to attract us. Maybe entice us into the wooded area where he stood, or lurked for that matter. I honestly couldn't tell you much about him, as we ran away quickly. I do, however, remember that it was very hot outside that day, and his makeup was pretty dingy and gross, as were his clothes. I know this sounds pretty unbelievable, but I assure you it happened. Otherwise, I wouldn't be telling this story. I sometimes wonder who that mime was. I'm sure he wasn't there to kidnap children, but who knows what would have happened if we'd gone into that thicket. And why there? He was just simply insane, I think. His mind was gone, which is far more creepy than any kidnapping stranger I have read about.